Welcome to another episode of Luke Reacts. Please like and follow our channel for more cool stuff from this channel. Now labeled Two Hammers, named after Judas the Hammer Maccabeus and Charles the Hammer Martel. One fought off and defeated the pagans, and the other the Muslims. And we are up against that fight now to this day. And this is the fight of our moment. And so please, again, like and subscribe to this channel. Now, this is part 2 of my reaction to Tucker Carlson and Mike Huckabee, Ambassador Mike Huckabee. They had a debate, discussion, and interview last week, and it was released on Friday, and obviously has caused all kinds of responses from all kinds of people. But my take, I'm kind of going slow at this. The last one, if you made it through it, was almost 2 hours. It took me 2 hours to respond to 1 hour of Mike and Tucker. But here we are, round 2. This one's going to be about the section where they discuss Christian Zionism. Now, where we left off in the last one of the big themes that I showed was how Tucker is intentionally using this conversation not only to drive a wedge between Christians and Jews, between American Christian support for Israel, but that Israel is not our ally. The first question out of the gate was about Jonathan Pollard, then goes into this long diatribe about how Israel is supposedly shielding, he used the word shielding many times, shielding child molesters by prohibiting extradition. None of that was true, but nonetheless, that's not where Tucker leaves off. He doesn't want that kind of level of thought to go into this. So where he leaves off, he opens up his conversation, we'll get there in a second, with what we came here for is Christian Zionism. Okay, now before I get to this, because one of the things that Tucker is going to say right out of the gate is, what is Christian Zionism? And he says, I don't know. Explain it to me. And it's really strange that he starts out that way, because a couple days before that he interviewed Mike Huckabee, he interviewed a Palestinian Christian named Fares Abraham. Now, Fares runs he's a Christian. He runs an organization called Levant Ministries. He is, got his attended Liberty University, and is very active in this space. Now, I want to show him because Tucker asked the very same question. Actually, Tucker asked the same questions to Fares that he ends up asking to Mike Huckabee. So clearly there was a kind of a prep. This was a prep interview. Who knows how much conversation took place before, but it seems to be all the lines of questioning are the same. And so when Tucker says to Huckabee, I don't know what Christian Zionism is, he's not telling the truth, because he literally just hung out with the guy who told him what he thought Christian Zionism was. Now, there's that feigning ignorance kind of shtick that Tucker is using, because he could say, so I met with this Palestinian Christian, and he says Christian Zionism is X, and you say, what do you say? What do you say Christian Zionism is? Like, that's an honest question. But to be like, I don't know what Christian Zionism is, that is not an honest question, because he had just met with this guy. And so actually Tucker releases the video of his long interview with Fares the day that the interview with Tucker and Huckabee took place. And one of these days I will, after this, so I've 2 more videos of Tucker that I want to kind of review. I want to review his, or react to, because that's what I do, react to his conversation with Doug Wilson, and react to his conversation with Fares. Now, I will get to those eventually. After this part 2, I will do the next part. Actually, will be next week. Just kind of ran out of time this week in the recordings because it take me forever. We'll explore basically the death of innocence. We're going to have on Mark Levesque, Dr. Mark Levesque, who is an expert in just war. Him and I go way back, and we're going to get into the whole conversation about that Tucker raises, but that will be in part 3. So this is part 2, Christian Zionism. I'm going to bring up Fares Abraham first.
Stream of Christians that has disproportionate power and influence on U.S. policy. And it's that policy that is inflicting pain and suffering on a community like Beit Sahur. This is the core issue.
I know.
And they're doing it in the name of the Bible, where the Bible is innocent.
I got a lecture this morning from an Israeli, this morning, I'm not an anti-Semite. I abhor anti-Semitism. It's against my religion. I've said that 1,000 times and I mean it. If I was anti-Semite, I'd just say I'm an anti-Semite. I am not an anti-Semite and I'm never going to become one, no matter what they say. So I'm talking to, what do you want me to do to prove I'm not an anti-Semite? 100%. Recant your attacks on Christian Zionism. It wasn't stop saying mean things about the Jews. I've never said any mean things about the Jews. I don't feel bad things about them. I'm not mad at the Jews, period. I'm mad, as I've said a million times, about my people, Christians, distorting the gospel in a way that allows theft and murder and the degradation of human beings. I'm never going to be okay with that. And that's what they're mad at me about, is because I've called out Christian Zionism, because they see that. I just had this conversation an hour ago, so it's fresh in mind.
Yes.
They see that as critical. You have to have American evangelical pastors telling their congregations, who are sweet people who don't know any better,
yes,
that God wants you to support the state of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. That's what they need that.
Yes.
Is that fair, do you think?
Now, there's so much I could unpack that, and I will get to that at some point. You got to stay on this channel. And again, if you like and subscribe, you'll get it when it's out. But what you have here is this. It's clear to everybody who listened to that Tucker's big issue is with Christian Zionists. And why is that the case? Because Christian Zionists are the last group of all the allies of the Jews in America in particular that stuck with them through all of the war, through all the stuff. And if American Christian Zionists or Zionist Christians, if Israel and the Jews lose the Christian Zionists, then there's no stopping the Islamists, because they will have no allies. But there are 80 million of us who stand with Israel and the Jews, and Tucker is trying to change that. He is trying to. He actually on a show this morning, he in a monologue brought that up again. That is his goal. That is a stated goal, and you got to wonder who benefits from that. Maybe Qatar, Saudis, the Iranians for sure. All the enemies of Israel benefit from the takedown of Christian Zionists or Zionist Christians. Now, that's why I am fighting so hard against Tucker, is because he has identified the problem, the core problem, which is, if I can drive a wedge, I can destroy Israel. And, to say it's really strange to me to think this is just about money or something, right? Because it's ideological for him, it seems, and he's committed to it. And yeah, let's say he takes $100 million from the Qataris, because they can throw around that kind of money, but yet also agrees with them on the issues, because he has clearly picked us out. Like, I want you to listen to the tone that he carries with Fares versus the tone he carries with Mike Huckabee. It's very different. So let me keep going here.
What Christian Zionists get wrong here is that not because they want to create a safe place for the Jewish people. That could be an honorable cause.
Yes, I agree.
But the process, the implication of what that means to them, Christian Zionism means creating a safe place for the Jews where they can feel safe and secure, and which is honorable, great.
Got it.
But for Palestinians, Christian Zionism means taking our land, taking our resources, while declaring that you have a divine right, and the descendants of the shepherds in the little town of Beit Sahur, who have maintained their Christian presence for the past 2,000 years, do not somehow have that same divine right. Our ancestors were Jewish. Palestinian Christians, they first accepted the message of Christ, and that church is still intact today. As I said, some people even converted when Islam came to Palestine. Some people converted, but they did not convert from atheism. Muslims converted from Christianity, and probably some Jews even converted to Islam. So you might have some Muslims that can claim that they have a Jewish DNA. But again, identity changes. It's dynamic.
Let me just jump in here and talk about this briefly, because this will come up a little bit when it comes up with the whole DNA conversation that Tucker brings up later. But what you have here is, that there are Christians in the land that claim they go back to the time of Jesus. My friend Shadeh Khalil up in Galilee, he is an Aramean Christian, so he doesn't identify as an Arab. Now, I suspect, and I don't know Fares. I know a bunch of his friends, but I don't know him. I suspect that he self-identifies as an Arab Palestinian Christian, right? So, he could, if he claimed amongst his peers, no, I'm a Jewish Palestinian Christian, then I wonder how he would be treated, right? Because his town, Bet Sahur, which is right next to Bethlehem, there's kind of three main Christian towns right around each other, villages that are now towns. They kind of merge one into the other: Bethlehem, Bet Jala, and Bet Sahur, and it is the Shepherd's Field area. But those Christians, when the Jews came back, it wasn't like the Christians welcomed the Jews back as brothers. No, they participated they joined forces with the Muslims to attack the Jews. That's the reality. And to think again, it's like one of the most frustrating parts of this is the idea that the Palestinians have no agency, that they're just kind of minding their own business, and the next thing you know, it's the Jews are attacking them. It's not at all the nature of the historical reality on the ground for the last hundreds and hundreds of years. It's very different than that. And so and the perception, the idea that by supporting Israel, the reestablishment of Israel, and supporting the Jewish right to live on the land that was promised to them as an everlasting covenant, means that by default, Christian Zionists also believe that the Jews should, all the other groups on the land should be kicked out. That is not the belief of any Christian Zionist I know. But you would know it if you were listening to Fares and Tucker and their bromance here.
Of course.
It language changes, but the people are there.
So I think now's a good time to ask you to explain what Christian Zionism is. And I'm at a disadvantage because I'm so ignorant. I just didn't grow up around this at all. So as fairly as you can you explain what Christian Zionism? And I should say, you came to the United States and went to Liberty University.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Lots of great people there. Lots of Christian Zionists there. Yeah. Lots. So I think you understand it, right?
Yeah. What is it? And I loved my time at.
I gotta say again, like Tucker just spent a few minutes talking about how he's against the Christian Zionists. So to think he's against something he doesn't know, come on, Tucker. And Tucker grew up Episcopalian. Now, the Episcopal Church has had an anti-Zionist stream for about the last 30 years, maybe longer than that. There was a point really back in the 60s when what's interesting is when Israel was more aligned with the Soviet Union in its formation in the early days, when you had the kibbutzes and you had a very kind of communist secular state, the mainline churches in the United States were much more pro-Israel. And then over the years, as Israel began to move towards America, and the relationship between America and Israel began to improve, and the relationship between Israel and Christians in America, evangelical Christians in America, began to improve. At that point, you have the mainline denominations in the U.S. begin to turn against Israel. The largest funder of the Anglican Church in the Holy Land, particularly there's a St. George's church in Jerusalem, is funded by the Episcopal Church in New York City. It's called Trinity Wall Street. It's a major funder of the work in the Middle East, in the Holy Land, particularly, and in Jerusalem. So spare me this my church has nothing to do with this. No, your church, Tucker, has been very involved in this. I was at various general assemblies of the Episcopal Church fighting the anti-Zionists there. So it comes by you naturally. That's my point here.
Liberty University.
Yes.
So thankful for the great education I got there. I had to meet a lot of great friends, great professors. My life was changed there. I actually rededicated my life and I committed my life to service at Liberty University, and I received the vision to start Levant Ministries at Liberty, which is the organization I now lead. But here is where, Christian Zionism have a different understanding. It's a theopolitical movement that says that God has two distinct people with two distinct plans and two distinct covenants. When Mike Huckabee was asked on,
that is one of the most absurd definitions of Christian Zionism I've ever heard. That is not actually what Christian Zionists believe. Now, Huckabee actually will do a much better job of this. But so I'll get my cards on the table. So a Christian is a person who believes Jesus Christ is Lord and King of the universe and the Savior of the whole world. And one who believes in Jesus is a Christian. Okay. A Zionist, now you have various forms of Zionism. You can have a totally secular Zionism, or you can have kind of a understanding of a Zionism that is rooted in something. Now, my definition of Zionism is the Jews living in the land that was promised to them as an everlasting covenant by God. That's it. I'm a Christian who believes that when God promised the land to Abraham and his offspring, that as an everlasting covenant, that he meant it. That's what I believe. Now, we're going to get into the land and the people and all that sort of stuff coming. But nonetheless, to this idea that what he is putting forth as Christian Zionism is a form of, there's what's called dual covenant, which believes that there's a covenant with God, a covenant of God with the Jews, and the covenant of God with Christians. So there's two covenants. Now, I don't believe that at all. I'm a proud Christian Zionist. I believe that there is a series of covenants that God made with humanity. The first one being, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. That's the Adamic covenant. There's the Noahic covenant. There's the Abrahamic covenant, which we'll get into about to your offspring I will give this land, that God says to Abraham over and over and over again. And then you have the Mosaic covenant, which is what we call the law or Torah. And then you have, after that, you have the Davidic covenant, which God says, my kingdom, your kingdom will never depart from your family line. Okay. And then you have the new covenant. But the first person to start talking about a new covenant was Jeremiah. So Jesus is actually picking up the language of Jeremiah when he's talking about a new covenant, because Jeremiah talks about, I will give you a new covenant. I will take away your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. That kind of language is very strong in Jeremiah. And Jesus picks that up. And when Jesus brings in the new covenant, it doesn't do away with the old. It's a continuation of it is another covenant in a line of covenants. But we might get into this. Galatians 3:17 says, in talking about the relationship between the promise to Abraham and the law, it says, and the law came 430 years after the promise, and the covenant that comes after does not nullify the covenant that comes before it. So if that becomes a principle, which I believe it is, that is Paul saying in Galatians that covenants do not nullify previous covenants. Like, every Christian should affirm the command of God to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. I don't know anybody who, if I asked Fares, would he believe that is the covenant is rejected? And I suspect he would say no. Okay. But what we, Fares goes on and describes a bit of this, and I'll play it right now. But this whole relationship between covenants is actually a very important feature. And it's one of the things that we as Christian Zionists are arguing about. I have this conversation almost every day.
He was on an interview at TBN, Trinity Broadcasting Network, and he was asked, what is the verse that guides your day-to-day job as a U.S. ambassador in Israel? You know what he said? He said Genesis 12:3. I want to be able to bless Israel so I can be blessed. I want to secure all the blessings for Israel so the United States can receive the blessings in return. So for us, we have to look at this theology.
Do you know what that means? To me, as someone who's interested in words, a former editor, book writer, I care about definitions. And so when Christian Zionists say Israel, what are they talking about?
That's a great question, because as Christians, we have to look at the Scripture through the lens of Christ. Christ is the point. Christ is the fulfillment. And the way I look at scriptures, I look at the Old Testament, the faithful and the righteous people of the Old Testament, and the righteous and the faithful people of the New Testament as one faith community. They're beautifully connected through the cross. The moment that you start separating this is when you start getting into different interpretation of what Israel means today. Is it the government of Israel, are God's people or not? But when we look at the gospel, we see Jesus as the very center. We look at the Old Testament with the lens of the gospel. We see Jesus in the Old Testament. And what Jesus did is very critical. And it really is important for us to understand what Jesus did in the new covenant he brought and how it changed and it transformed the old covenant that God had with Abraham.
Yes.
It didn't abolish it. It didn't replace it, which is, we're not replacement theology. I do not agree with replacement theology. God is not done with the Jews. God is not done with anybody. God wants everybody to come to the saving knowledge and to enjoy his grace and to enjoy his blessings. God desires this, for God so loved the world, right?
I can keep going on that, but I do need to show this whole conversation between how it unfolds with Tucker and Huckabee. It is very different, let's just say. And the thing is, like Fares and I suspect him and I we'd have some great conversations about what Zionism means and what's the relationships with the coming of Jesus and how that plays into our understanding of God's work in this world. That is the question that every Christian is asking or should be asking. And it's why so much of this conversation often spills into what I would also call a theopolitical conversation, because there's a theological stream in the midst of this that can't be overlooked. All right, so I'm going to pull that clip down, and I'll get into that interview with Fares at a different point. And I look forward to meeting him at some point. Love to have him on my show, or I go on his. But the conversation with him is very different than the conversation that Tucker has with Huckabee.
As I said at the outset, I said something awful that I regret that my wife barked at me about. I lashed out at Christian Zionists and evangelicals, and I just want to say again that I'm sorry. I've always liked them because they're pro-life and they're also really nice people. So for the third time, I'm sorry that I said that. I think part of my problem was I don't understand the theology, and you are not a fake.
Now, did you just listen to Tucker with Fares going off on Christian Zionism? He really doesn't like it. And here he is like, oh, I'm sorry, Christian Zionists. I don't actually hate you. I think you're really nice people. And I'm wrong for calling you a heresy, except I just did, my last show. Sorry again. I mean, sorry, this time will be the last time. Right.
Baptist ministry, you're an actual minister. You had a church for many years. You're an actual theologian. So, and I mean this with sincerity. I hear people say, those who bless Israel will be blessed. I know it's a reference to Genesis. I don't understand the connection between that concept and modern Israel and the geopolitical world. And so I'm going to stand back and ask
let's first define, because, from my days as a debater in high school and college, one of the things I knew, you didn't start the debate till you defined the terms.
Amen.
Let's define the terms.
Thank you.
What is a Christian Zionist? What does that mean to you? What does it mean?
I don't know. It's the people who call me a Nazi for asking what Israel means. I mean, that's kind of I don't even know.
But here's the point. If you say a Christian Zionist is a person who has a brain virus and is guilty of heresy, that's a pretty big charge.
I know. I shouldn't have made it. I made it out of anger and ignorance.
So,
and I'm
Christian, I think we can agree, is somebody who follows Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
Has a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, believes in his death, burial, resurrection, has repented of one's sins, and have accepted him as one Savior. Would that be fair?
Amen.
Christian. Define that. Zionist. A Zionist simply means a person who believes that the Jewish people have a right to have a homeland where they have security and safety. Did you believe that the Jews have a right to live in Israel? Do you believe the Jews have a right to live in Israel? That would be a Zionist. That's all a Zionist is.
I have a million questions about what all of those terms mean.
Yeah.
But conceptually, I wish Israel no harm. I don't want to see them.
Do you want them to have a place where they can live with safety and security?
So I saw this recently in an extremely
He doesn't answer that question. See that? Now he does answer it later, and he says no, actually. We'll get that, though, in a minute.
telling exchange between the lieutenant governor of Texas, who I know and I've always liked, and a woman I don't know, never met, who's on the Religious Liberty Commission or something. And she said, I'm a Catholic, but I'm not a Zionist. And they had this ferocious exchange. And he kept saying, and everyone on the panel seemed to keep saying, you have to believe in Israel's right to exist. Which I've never kind of questioned, just for the record, but it did raise two questions I think are really important. And I hope you'll answer them. One is, where does that right come from?
I would say it comes from, essentially, you could say it comes from the Bible. I would say that it does. But it comes also from a long iteration of historical precedents going to the Balfour Declaration of 1917. It comes from the League of Nations 1927. It comes from the United Nations 1947,
Right.
the Declaration of Independence of the Israel State in May of 1948. They were immediately attacked. They won the war. They were attacked again in 1956. They won the war. They were attacked again in 1967 by 5 countries. They won the war. They were attacked again in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War. They won the war. The point is, does Israel have a right to exist? They also had wars in 1982 in Lebanon. They've had the intifadas, 2 of those. They've had
Lebanon
war
again in 06. I was there. No, I'm very familiar with the modern history of the state.
Okay.
Pretty familiar, I think. And I've been
But a
here.
Zionist simply means somebody who believes that Israel has a right to exist. Now, the question is, do you believe Israel has a right to
I
exist?
guess. I mean, I want Israel
Yes.
to exist. Well, no, but I want to know what that means. So, like, do other countries have a right to exist?
Well, they do exist.
Do they have a right to exist? You keep saying Israel has a right to exist, and I want to know what other countries
They have
a
a
right
legal
to.
right because every international body in the last 100 years has said the Jewish people have a right
I understand
to their
you explained
indigenous
it, but
homeland.
my question
So that's a
is,
legal right.
what
Do
other-
they have a biblical right? I would say that yes, but you may say they don't.
I don't know. I'm actually
Okay.
sincerely interested in finding out what you mean by a biblical right. But first, to the legal right, does any other country on the planet have the same right that Israel has to exist?
Well, you could say, does Jordan have a right to exist when it was Transjordan?
All right, this whole line of argumentation on the right to exist is, I find to be, it's very fascinating, but it is the basis of political philosophy. I mean, that is the question that so many political philosophers, both now and going way back, are asking. Where does the idea of a nation derive from, and what does it mean, and how do you get it, and etc. Now, I'm more inclined to probably follow Matt Walsh's thinking on this. So after this debate, Matt posted on X, and here's what he says. Now, he said, this is Matt, I'm quoting Matt here. Now, the whole debate about which countries have the right to exist is based on false pretense. There is no right to exist for nations. What does it even mean? How can a country be entitled to exist? Every country on earth came into existence through force and remains in existence through force. If you can't defend your existence, you will not exist anymore. The history of civilization is full of countries that existed and then ceased to exist. Are the rights of those countries, now non-existent countries, being perpetually violated by their non-existence? It makes no sense. If you can defend your existence, then you can exist. If you can't, then eventually you won't exist. It's really that simple. A right is an entitlement by definition, and there is no country that has an eternal entitlement to exist, whether it can defend and support itself or not. The very concept is absurd and meaningless. Now, that's very interesting, and others have made this point that basically every nation comes about through violence. No nation comes about through kind of like the stamp of approval by something. Like, even as the United Nations was discussing and debating the formation of a Jewish homeland, right? Balfour Declaration said there should be a Jewish homeland. I also actually said there should be one for Arabs as well. And then there was years of various commissions trying to figure out how to divide up the land between these two groups, Jews and Arabs. But the day that the British pulled out of Israel, of what they called Palestine, the day that ended, then Israel declared independence. So there was a vacuum that got created instantly, and a few seconds later, Israel said, "We are a nation in this same land." Now, then they were attacked by 5 nations surrounding them, and those nations lost. Israel came about not by the declaration of the United Nations, but by its defense of itself. And Israel remains in defense of itself. Now, the question that is kind of behind that is, and this is where I think the Christians and the biblical Zionists show up, is that there's a role that God plays in this. And therefore, we think about it at a deeper level. And I would be in that camp, right? So I do think that nations basically are formed by the ability to kind of coalesce and defend themselves. And I will also put all my cards on the table by believing that there needs to be more nations in the world, not less. I am a firm believer in, I think the solution to Syria is balkanization. I believe the solution to a lot of the problems in Iraq is balkanization. I would love to see a Kurdistan. I don't know why the Azerbaijans had to take over the Armenians. I don't know why the Turks had to do that too. That whole understanding of borders, boundaries, nations, definition of nations, all that political philosophy there is incredibly fascinating to me. But there is this is what they're getting at. They are having a hard time defining where the right comes from. And Huckabee's appeal to international law is I just don't think it sticks long enough, because Taiwan, which I believe is actually a country, is not recognized by the United Nations as a country. And the U.S. does not have an embassy in Taiwan, because the U.S. also is unsure of what to do with Taiwan. Now, we want it to be independent, but we're not willing to call it a country. So what about Taiwan? And there's China has aspirations to take it and have it be theirs. And the U.S. has a business office in Taiwan. But is Taiwan not a nation? I think Taiwan's a nation. So it's all very interesting to me, but it is also kind of the stuff that you cover in Political Philosophy 101.
And the Brits came and divided up the Middle East, and they gave some land to Jordanians, and they gave some land to the Saudis, and they gave some land to various Middle Eastern countries, and it was all carved up. And the French gave Lebanon its right to exist. Do they have a right to exist?
Do they?
Well, why not?
Okay. So that's my. So yeah. Every country.
Does the U.S. have a right to exist?
I'm asking you.
Okay, and I'm telling you, I think the U.S. has a right to exist.
Okay.
We came here. We came there. We're in Israel now talking. But does the U.S. have a right to exist? Does anyone question whether we have a right to exist?
I don't. Yeah, but of course, I'm for America.
Good for you.
But so every current country on the map has the same right to exist that Israel has. Is that what you're saying?
I think what we're saying is that when a country has established itself and it is following international law, it has been deemed by numerous bodies that it is indigenous to its homeland, as Israel is. This is its homeland. It goes back 3,800 years to the time of Abraham. It's not that the Jewish people just showed up here in 1948 and said, we're going to have some land.
Hold on. So those are two different tracks, and I just want to make sure that we separate them so I understand each one separately.
All right.
So you're saying there's the modern legal framework, and so you said a country that abides by international law has a right to exist.
I would say that is a part of its existence.
Would the inverse be true, that a country that does not abide by international law forfeits its right to exist?
Not necessarily, if it has the capacity to stay and make its case known. But there have been Jewish people in this land,
but that's
in this very land, for 3,800 years.
Okay. So, but you're saying as the modern nation state with borders and a military and a Knesset and just all the kind of trappings of a modern country, all of which I support, that country every country on the planet has the same right as Israel to exist because it does exist. Is that what you're saying? I'm just trying to understand the concept here.
Well, I think what we're trying to get to is Christian Zionism, and you've taken this way off the road.
I don't know that I have. I don't mean to. Christian Zionism is a separate thing, but I just keep hearing people say Zionism is the belief.
But that's the fundamental argument that's going on. Does Israel have a right to live in their indigenous, ancient, historical land, a land that has been affirmed throughout international organizations, a land that has direct ties to the Jewish people?
I just want to know if this is a universal principle. I guess that's what I'm getting at, because if it's not, then it's meaningless to me, because as a Christian, I believe in universal principles. Something is right for everyone or it's wrong for everyone. We don't believe in special cases.
Here's the question. If the Jews didn't have this land, would the Jews have a right to any land?
I don't know. I'm not attacking the Jews. I'm asking if this applies to every people and every nation. Does every nation have the same right to its own homeland, to its own physical land that you say Israel does?
Again, I think I think there is a universal principle, and the universal principle is that every nation that can exist does exist, and the nations that seem to not be able to form themselves don't. Right? When Kurdistan tried to become an independent state a few years back, it failed. It didn't get the support. Like, it failed on two reasons. One, it was not able to actually hold. It couldn't support itself. It couldn't defend itself, and it had no recognition from the international community. Right? So those two things kind of go hand in hand. Like, if I tried to create the nation of where I live, the 2 acres I'm on right now, and I say I'm a nation, the nation of Luke-Munistan, like, I could try and hold it. No one's going to recognize it. And every policeman can come and try and kick me off this land, but I said, no, I'm in Luke-Munistan. It's my own nation. I'm an independent nation. And at some point, push came to shove, I guarantee that I would lose that fight, just because the nation around me would take it over and be like, no, we decided that it doesn't count. Now, so you get those two things actually go hand in hand. What Tucker is kind of pushing at is trying to get a universal principle, and he thinks that there's a weak spot right here with this definition. He thinks he's onto something. He wants a universal principle, but he also does not care about any particularity. And that is a tension, very much a tension within Christian denominations, particularly. The tension is whether or not the tension is, does the particular still matter when there's universal principles? Now, I think the answer is yes. The question is whether Tucker does or not. That I don't know.
I feel like we're in a rabbit hole here.
No, I think it's a very straightforward question.
No, but
does that right extend to other countries other than Israel?
But the most important thing that is going on in our culture right now is whether or not the people that are yelling in the streets from the river to the sea, whether that's a legitimate point of view to say that there should not be a Jewish homeland. There should not be a Jewish
You'll
state.
never hear me say
period.
that. I just want to know.
I know you haven't said it, but that's the argument.
It's one of the arguments going on globally. And the United States, has a pretty narrow view, I would say, in our media culture, of what's happening around the world. There are plenty of countries having this debate. Stonehenge is a lot older than the first temple in Israel. And it was built by the same people who live there now. It's the same people. And they are being pushed off their island and outnumbered by people from other places. And so in Great Britain, in Ireland, which is also a country with a nation of people, a race, if you will, that is being replaced.
Who are they being replaced by?
Immigrants.
Okay.
From other places.
I just wanted to clarify because I was one of the...
Well, just as a demographic matter, it's just like you can look at the numbers. It's not controversial. Just look at the numbers. There'll be a minority in their country. And their people have been there longer than Jews have been in Israel. And so they're having this debate too. That's all I'm saying. And lots of places are having this debate.
Sure.
So does that principle apply to everyone, or is it specific?
So are you picking that up? That little stream of thought right there. So Ireland is a place, it's got a race, it's a people, and it's being pushed out. The people there are being pushed out by other people, i.e. immigrants. And in that case, it is, Muslim immigrants from other parts of the world, and the Irish people are feeling squeezed, it's all being done at the main political party right now, actually in charge of Ireland, is welcoming it. And the Green Party in Ireland, which is quite strong, and the left in Ireland is welcoming the immigrants in and allowing that to take over. My perception here is that Tucker is trying to make a case that the Jews coming to the land of Israel are like the Muslims coming to Ireland. That's my sense of this, which is very on brand, actually, for kind of his line of argument here. That this, again, based upon his conversation with Fares and the way that he understands the place of the Palestinian Christian in particular is very important. And he sees let's call them like these new Jews to Israel are pushing off the native people. And so that's an interesting line of thinking that we'll have to explore further.
Just to Israel.
I think it applies specifically to Israel. It applies to anyone who can prove that they have some connection to the land and connection to the history and connection to international law. But Israel, I think, does have an
bringing up
extraordinary
international law. So if, again...
Well, no, but let me finish this,
yes,
Tucker, because here's Here's the point. We're talking about Christian Zionism. The idea that as a Christian, I believe in both the Old and the New Testament. Why wouldn't I? I'm a person of the book. There are 80 million evangelical Christians in the United States. What makes us who we are is our adherence to the Scripture, our belief that the Bible, all of it, not part of it, but all of it, is the Word of the living God.
Yeah.
So if I believe in the Old and the New Testament, I do believe that there is a very specific call to the Jewish people that started with Abraham, and he called them out of what is now modern-day Iraq, said, "Come where I send you." He came. This is the land. Genesis 12:3. He says, "I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you." In Genesis 17, he looks out at the world. He says, "Look, and this is where I'm giving you the land."
I think
And
it's
since that time, there have been people living in this land
Right.
connected to that moment of history. So there is a historical connection that is unbroken.
You've said that, and I want to ask you what that means a little more specifically, if that's okay. But first, let me just say that you could say the same thing of Britons who've been there in their land longer.
Is anybody trying to tell the Brits they can't live there anymore?
No, what's happening is...
But they are saying that to the Jews.
Oh, okay. But I just wonder if you would extend the same sympathy or the same principle. You seem like this is... You think I'm trying to trap you? I'm not. I'm at all trying to trap you. It'd be as simple as saying native Britons have the same...
I got no problem with the native Brits having their land.
Having the right
my
to
point
their
is, I don't
land,
know
and
that there
so-
is a biblical connection for the Brits.
Okay.
But I would
So
say,
that's what it comes
take
down
that
to.
off the table, and I think there's still a basis for the Jews having this little bitty strip of real estate.
I'm not even arguing with you. I'm just trying to... At all. I'm just trying to understand what it is that you're saying, because it's not obvious to me, and maybe it's an IQ problem, but I'm having trouble understanding it. But let me just go back to just clarify one thing.
Okay.
You've brought up international law at least twice, maybe three times, as a basis for Israel's legitimacy. If Israel was out of compliance with international law, whatever that is, would it be less legitimate?
Depends on if the law and the way it's applied is legitimate. There are some applications of so-called international law that are not legitimate.
I agree.
Look at the ICC or the ICJ.
I agree.
Utterly ridiculous. One of the reasons I'm so grateful President Trump and Secretary Rubio are pushing hard, trying to get rid of the ICC and the ICJ, is because they have become rogue organizations that are no longer really about an equal application of law and justice.
I don't know enough about it to say if that's true or not. But I'm interested that you yourself appeal to international law as a basis of Israel's
Well, what I'm looking
legitimacy.
at is the whole of the last 100 years.
The Balfour Declaration is not exactly international law, by the way. It was a letter, I think.
It was maybe not law, but it was a declaration. It was
Well, so much of this comes down to who said Israel has the right to exist on this land, right? Or who affirms it and who then rejects it also. Because you have, after Israel was established, all of the Muslim countries refused to even talk and have any connection at all. There's the famous meeting in Khartoum with the Arab states, the three no's. We will not negotiate. We will not, I failed to remember the other two, unfortunately, because I just thought of it. I could have looked at my notes and prepared. But the point is that you have the British were the kind of preeminent empire at the time, preeminent world power, who affirmed the establishment of a homeland for the Jewish people. Now, the majority of nations in the world actually have recognized already a Palestinian state, but the U.S. has not. Now, the U.S. could at some point say we recognize a Palestinian state, but then the follow-up is what happens next, right? Is it the recognition of a state by the United Nations suddenly determine, okay, you're a state, and then you can, the international community will support any efforts you have to hold that, or is it different? And this is what there's whole libraries full of books on this stuff. This is the primary talking area of political philosophy, particularly as it pertains to international affairs. Now, I find international law to be kind of a joke and not really a strong. I'm not a fan, let's just say, but I think this line of reasoning is important for the political philosophers to kind of work out. And I do believe that it is important to have universal principles. I affirm that. I think there is such a thing as like a natural law, a law that is a universal law, because I think it points to a universal lawgiver. And that universal lawgiver interestingly enough, gave that universal law on tablets in Sinai to this people that we're talking about. who then established a place and set up a temple to worship that God who gave that law. Now, that is the particularity coming into the universal. Now, what Tucker's trying to undo is saying, like, is actually trying to make everything universal and reject the particular.
Assumption and a declaration that was done by Lord Balfour in Great Britain. At that time, this land was under the British mandate. And he said the Jews should have the land that was theirs from 3,800 years ago. It was simple as that.
Right. And I'm not debating that. I'm just, it was not international law. It was a colonial power saying, okay,
but then later
we're
it was
divide up the
international
world
law
after
under the League of
fall
Nations, under the United Nations. And then because of the victories that Israel had against those who tried to annihilate them, and it wasn't just that they were trying to take a little piece of their land, they tried to annihilate them.
Okay.
And there is still to this day the shouts of from the river to the sea. And Tucker, that means only one thing, not the shrinking of Israel, but the annihilation of Israel.
I don't think
that's different.
I don't think you can say that you know what it means, actually, because you don't know what's in people's hearts. So why don't we just deal with the facts? Maybe some people mean it.
I know it's in their
that.
mouths. I know it's in their minds.
But I'm not, look, you'll never hear me say that. What you will hear me say is I'm confused by what the definitions are. So let's go through this. You've appealed to Genesis. Genesis 15 says it's Abram, it's pre-Abraham, it's Abram, receives from God the news that his descendants will inherit the land. And you tell me as the theologian if I'm getting this wrong, but from the Euphrates to the Nile. I think that's right. And that would include like basically the entire Middle East. That would be the Levant. So that would be Israel, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. It would also be big parts of Saudi Arabia and Iraq. It would be, I mean,
I'm not sure it would go that far. I mean, it would be a big piece of land, but here's the point.
It would be a lot of places that are now countries.
But this particular area that we're talking about now, Israel, is a land that God gave through Abraham to a people that he chose. It was a people, a place, and a purpose. We can look at it that way. Christian Zionism, I want to go back because that's where we started.
I'm not going to let you off on this because you have said it 3 times that God gave this land to this people. And so it is entirely fair for me with respect to ask, what land are you talking about? Because I just read Genesis 15, as I have many times. Mm-hmm. And that land, I think it says, from the Nile to the Euphrates, which is, once again, basically the entire Middle East. So God gave that land to his people, the Jews, or he didn't. You're saying he did. What does that mean? Does Israel have the right to that land? Because you're appealing to Genesis. Yeah. You're saying that's the original deed.
It would be fine if they took it all, but I don't think that's what.
All right, that was the gotcha. That was the gotcha that Tucker wanted to use to get Huckabee fired. And immediately, as if it was prepared in advance, the bunch of Arab states came out with a letter saying how outrageous it is, and then there's lots of hand-wringing about greater Israel and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's very important for me to unpack some of this whole line of thinking for you. So let's see what the Bible says. We're going to pick up the story right where Abraham starts. His portion begins, which is in the 12th chapter of Genesis. Let me read this to you. It says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go to the country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and to him who dishonors you, I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." So that's chapter 12. Then we move on to the next chapter, chapter 13. Chapter 13 says, well, actually, let me back up. There's another section in chapter 12 I wanted to read to you. And this is in verse 7. "And then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land." Sentence. That's it, right there. Okay. Now in 13 it says, this is again, the Lord says to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, "Lift up your eyes and look from this place where you are, northward and southward, eastward and westward, for all the land that you see I give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make you your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted." Now there are those, it seems, that believe that forever doesn't mean forever, which is kind of strange to me because it's in the Bible. Now, the portion that we have Tucker bringing up is from chapter 15. And here's what chapter 15 says. This is after there is, again, there's a promise of the land. And then it says, "On this day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of the Canaanites, the Kizzites, the Kadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgasites, and the Jebusites. Lots of sites in there. Okay. That's the section that Tucker has kind of zoned in on and is talking about the size of the land. Now, that's totally fine, but it seems that later on, you have other kinds of things begin to unfold. So you have this section in chapter 22 where this promise is made also to Isaac following. Well, first to Abraham, just after Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac and the Lord stopped him. And this is a statement again that God makes to Abraham. I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars in heaven, as the sand is on the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gates of his enemies, and in your offspring all the nations of the earth will be blessed because you have obeyed my voice. Okay, so we're not dealing with just one verse, Genesis 12:3, or this it's title deed that comes in chapter 15. We are dealing with multiple examples throughout Genesis where God is saying to Abram, to your offspring, I will give this land. Now, again, it comes up here a little bit later. There is a section. So it obviously there's the story of Abram doesn't wait and has a child with his servant, and Ishmael is born. But Ishmael is not the child of promise. It's Isaac. Now, the promise runs through Isaac and then Jacob and then that line. Now, Isaac's the only patriarch that never left the land. He was going to go down to Egypt because there was a famine, but he didn't because the Lord said, don't do this. Okay. So here's what it says. This is in chapter 26 of Genesis. Now, there was a famine in the land beside the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, the king of the Philistines. And the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land that I will tell you. Sojourn in the land, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and your offspring, I will give all these lands. Okay. And he goes on. Okay. And he says it again. Now, the other interesting thing is later you have Jacob. Now, Jacob is the next patriarch. So you have Abraham, then Isaac, then Jacob. Now, Jacob was supposed to go find a wife he didn't want Jacob to find a wife among the Canaanites, among the people that Abraham was living among. Go back to where we're from, basically. And so that's the plan. So Jacob is on his way back. It says this, that Jacob left. This is chapter 28, verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran. Now, where's Haran? Haran is in Syria. Well, it's now Syria. Okay, but it was potentially within the boundaries that is within that deed read off by Tucker in chapter 15. But it seems that is not what it includes. Now it says, this is in verse 13. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I'm the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and your offspring. Okay. All right. Once again, to this land, I will give to you, to your offspring, I will give this land. That is repeated again and again and again. Now, again, it was clear at that point that Jacob was still within what we consider Israel proper today. Now, what you have then is in the book of Exodus, which is the next book. You have Moses appearing before the burning bush. And here's what you have in that section. This is picking up chapter 3, verse 8. Now, I come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and I'll bring them up out of that land to a land good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, and the Jebusites. Okay, so he's going to give that land. Now, what happens is that the people of Israel are delivered. They're delivered from Pharaoh. They cross the Red Sea. The sea opens up, and the people walk on dry land, and all that whole story. And as soon as they're crossing out of that area, they're already in that land that was promised as a deed promised to Abraham. So why didn't they stop there? If that was the land, then why not stop there? Why did the land that Jacob was promised was not that far out? So what is the point of that bigger story, of that bigger land? Well, perhaps it's because there provides land, this area of deed, for the other offspring of Abraham. Okay, because you have Ishmael and the promise of blessing to Ishmael. So there's no need actually for this conflict to be here. But what you have is the land that was to the west of the Jordan River was clearly the land that was promised. How do we know that? Because Moses was not allowed to go into it. And where did he stand? On Mount Nebo. And where did he look? Into the Jordan Valley. That was the promised land that the land was that God was giving to him. Another thing, another way you can interpret the Genesis 12:3, the Genesis 15 territories. You can also see it as God making a distinction between nations and empires. He sets the boundaries of Israel. And that is unique because every other nation always sought to expand and forever be expanding. And so I'm a firm believer, and I get this from my friend Yoram Mazzoni, that God is for nations, he's against empires. And that's a repeated theme throughout Scripture. He's not into empires, but he is into nations. And what are nations? What is a characteristic of nations? They have borders and boundaries. And so God is actually differentiating between empire and nation by limiting the land that is the land by which Abraham is promised. Now, for sure, there's a bunch of people who are going to kind of get on me for not affirming what is known as Greater Israel, which is the whole big area. But it is clear that the promised land that was promised to Moses, the one that Moses was heading to, because they wandered all over that land that was within the deed that was promised by God in Genesis 15. But it is clearly meaning later this land that is now the land of Israel. And there was even one of the tribes, one and a half of the tribes actually, wanted to stay on the side on the eastern side of the Jordan. And Moses was like, I don't know about that, man. And so there was a big kind of to-do about whether or not even the tribes could live on that side. And one and a half of them did. That whole issue of the land and the size of the land is really intended to throw off Huckabee. And it's, like I said, it's the point in which as soon as it comes up, you have these Arab countries who are starting to push out this letter, how terrible Huckabee is. There's a lot of people who are trying to get Huckabee fired because of this statement, but they just grab that little clip, and there's a broader understanding. Now, who knows what God does? I'm not one to tell God what to do. There's lots of passages in the Bible that basically say, who am I to tell God what to do? Read the end of Job, read the end of Romans chapter 11. Why or in 9, what does the clay have to say to the potter? Why did you make me this way? The sovereignty of God, the sovereignty of God. One of the things that we as Christians of all stripes have to affirm is the sovereignty of God, and he is involved in nations to this day. He's involved in the affairs of man. His providence we believe in. Okay, so there's a theological base that everybody is affirming. And so by kind of trying to nail down and throw Huckabee into kind of this confusion over how big the land is, what counts as the size, and saying, is it this greater Israel? Well, again, there are some that do think that greater Israel is like you go all the way to Euphrates, you go all the way down the Nile. I don't know. Listen, if God wants to do something, and there's enough Israelites, enough Jews, enough Israelis to hold it, okay, whatever. And then God surprises me. He surprises me all the time. So that wouldn't be a big deal. But let me also kind of get at something I think is really important. And I brought this up a little bit earlier about, how we understand rights and who has the right to the land. One of the things that comes up is that whole concept about rights. Where do rights derive from? Is a big theme of political philosophy. And I'm a little surprised, actually, I'm not going to lie, I'm a little surprised how little understanding there is of the base level kind of dealings that political philosophers have to deal with. Where are rights derived? Now, according in the United States, we are celebrating 250 years of the United States of America this year. Amazing. Now, the founders of America, the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence, when he wrote it, he said these words, right? He said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among them, Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So according to Thomas Jefferson, the rights that we affirm as Americans are derived from God. Now, this is also something John Locke addresses, but this is a very core kind of portion of where do rights come from. Now, there was a contrary view of that, and it's totally secular, and it was affirmed by guys like Immanuel Kant, etc. And they would say that rights are derived from natural law, but don't attribute it to really any kind of God at all. Okay, so it's a secular natural right. Okay, but we're dealing with where do rights come from and who decides it. Like, I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment. I have a right to bear arms. Now, I live in New York, so that's really hard. But if I lived in, I don't know, South Carolina, I'd probably have an arsenal. But that is one of the rights that we as Americans, particularly on the conservative side, are affirming that right, the right to bear arms. And nobody's, I don't know if the last time Tucker questioned the right to bear arms and where the right comes from. Because according to the founders, it comes from God, it comes from the Creator. Okay. And then you have, the Thomas Hobbes and Rousseau, they have a different kind of understanding of where rights are derived from. And these guys said rights are derived from kind of like, we just kind of come together as a people, as individuals, and kind of agree to a social contract, because the state of nature is brutal, and we kind of agree to some structure that protects us all. And so again, it's not derived from God, nor is it derived from just natural law or natural rights. It's derived from just a bunch of people coming together randomly and agreeing on what this would be like. Okay, so those are kind of basic. I mean, these are the kinds of things, if you're taking a political philosophy class, that you will address pretty early. And I know that both Tucker and Huckabee know this. Tucker's a smart guy. He knows where rights are derived from. And this appeal to international law, well, it's fine. But part of it is Huckabee is kind of stuck, because as an ambassador, he's obviously representing kind of himself, but he's also, he's an ambassador, so he's got the kind of America behind him. So he has to appeal to something more than the Bible and more to God. But it is nonetheless the American understanding of where rights are derived from. Like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, free press, all these rights that we appeal to, they're derived as, if we're Americans and we affirm the founding of our country, these principles that built America, then we have to understand that these rights are derived from God. So when God says to your offspring, it says this to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, to your offspring, I will give this land. That is the same God who is saying you have a right to bear arms, that you have a right to free speech, you have a right to association, you have a right to freedom of religion. It's the same God who's saying both of those things. So I would appreciate a little bit of consistency here. That's what I'm saying.
But I don't think that's what we're talking about here today.
What would be fine? Well, it's exactly what we're talking about today.
But here's what I don't think
you think it would be fine if the state of Israel took over all of Jordan?
They don't want to take it over. They're not asking to take it over.
But you're saying that the reason that Israel is legitimate, has this inherent right to exist, is in part because God gave it to his people. And I am going to the same Bible that you're referring to and noticing that is a huge piece of land. So if God gave them that land, then they have a right to take it now by your definition, unless I'm missing something completely.
I think you're missing something, because they're not asking to go back to take all of that, but they are asking to at least take the land that they now occupy, they now live in, they now own legitimately, and it is a safe haven for them.
Well, but may I ask though, it's because you're explaining what Christian Zionism is and your theological beliefs. And you think you just said it would be fine with you if the state of Israel took all of Jordan, all of Syria, all of Lebanon.
Now, I have to say, Lebanon's not actually in that list. It goes to the mountains of Lebanon, but whatever. Now, what Tucker is doing here is trying to capture Huckabee in a trap. And unfortunately, he to some degree, he kind of did. But my bigger point is that there's enough other parts of the Bible in the Old Testament, within the Pentateuch, that limit that extent. And that is equally legitimate. Now, if the again, if they were able to take it, then and the nations that are there failed to defend it, well, according to Matt Walsh, that's how it works. It's how the rights of nations come to be. Now, I do think that there is something particular here, and that's my appeal to particularity comes out of this understanding of there are universal principles that affect all people. And at the same time, there are also particular calls to particular people. Those two things are not mutually exclusive.
That's really not exactly what I'm trying to say.
I'm asking,
Tucker.
is that what you said? I thought that's what you just said.
It was somewhat of a hyperbolic statement in that, if that's what you feel like that we're talking about, but it isn't. We're talking about this land that Israel, the state of Israel, now lives in and wants to have peace in. They're not trying to take over Jordan. They're not trying to take over Syria. They're not trying to take over Iraq or anywhere else. But they do want to protect
Lebanon?
their people. No, they're not trying to take over Lebanon.
But you're saying that as a religious man, as a Christian Zionist, you agree with a lot of religious communities here in Israel that the justification for this country is theological. It's a contract between God and his people. And I'm telling you that that contract includes a tract of land that is much larger than the current nation state.
So you may be a bigger Zionist than even the Jews are that live in Israel.
I'm trying to understand the implications of your theology for geopolitics, because you're saying that the present government of Israel has a moral right to take over what are now other people's countries.
No, I didn't say that.
Then what are you saying?
I'm simply saying that the people who live in Israel, I think, have a right to have security, have safety. They have a right to be able to live in this land that they have a connection to for 30
I told myself when I said a prayer that I would not get annoyed, but as someone who is, the father of daughters, when I see child molesters hiding in Israel and escaping American justice, I think I have a right to safety in my country too. So you can.
This again, like you have Tucker here, who this is like I said in the previous part. If you had a drinking game where shielding or protecting child molesters was on your drinking game list, then you would be drunk, because he brings this up again. He keeps saying that Israel is shielding or protecting child molesters. It is not doing that. The case that was debated earlier, for those who are just now catching on part two, the case is a case in Nevada where a Israeli person was caught up in a sting, soliciting underage girls. He got arrested. He was released on bail. He did his first hearing via Zoom, and his second hearing is scheduled for March 6th. He has not been convicted, and once he is convicted, or if the state of Nevada calls him to participate in the trial, at that point, if Israel says we're not going to send him over, then that's a whole different story. But that's not what's happening here. And to claim that it is, by appealing to his own children, is kind of absurd. And like this whole thing is an intentional attack against Israel to make sure that everybody thinks that Israel is not our greatest ally. That's what it's about.
Understand that I think most people feel they have a right to safety. I do think Israel has a right to safety, and I hope that for them. And I'm sincere, but I'm an American, and I have a right to safety in my country too.
Of course you do.
Agree? And I think so. But I just want to get to this point. If Israel were to say God gave us in Genesis 15 all of Lebanon, all of Syria, all the way up to Iraq, would that be legitimate in your view?
I don't think in this particular day and time they're asking for it.
Would it be legitimate?
I'm not sure that it would be.
Why? Because you just said that God gave it to them.
Because I think that there is an understanding that the people of Israel today, now if they end up getting attacked by all these places and they win that war and they take that land, then okay, that's a whole nother discussion. But you and I started out we started talking about something simple. Christian Zionism.
But it turns out it's not simple, because the core of Christian Zionism, you said, and I'm quoting you, is the understanding, the belief, the theological understanding that Jews have a moral and legal, we went through the legal,
biblical,
moral deriving from the biblical, from the promises in our Bible, which we share with the Jewish people, the first part of it, the Old Testament, that it derives from God's promise to the Jews. And so I have two questions. What are the borders of that? And who are those people in 2026? And you're not the first person I've asked, but you're the most reasonable, most gentle, most theologically informed person. So I'm really hoping for an answer. The first question was the borders. I can't get an answer. Those borders are. So I'm going to give up. But the second question,
It wasn't, he didn't get, well, there is an answer. And the answer is that what was promised has been more focused. And it could have been promised to all of the descendants of Abraham. But that doesn't negate the line of promise, which runs through Isaac and Jacob, and then on to the sons of Jacob that go into Egypt and come out and become what we call Israel in the Bible. And the tribes, the 12 tribes. Obviously, then other history unfolds after that, the taking of the 10 tribes by the Assyrians, and then the other 2 tribes being carried off into captivity, and then they're restored back to the land of Israel. Again, in like if the land is, if the deed includes all the way through the Euphrates, then the land that was where Babylon was counted among that. But that's not how the rest of the revelation unfolds. We believe as Christians, and I don't know if the Jews believe this or not, but as a Christian I do, in the progressive revelation of God, which means that the like as the scripture unfolds, we know more and more about God and his intent and how things should be. And that's the case here. It is progressive. It is moving in a direction. Again, now if God wanted to do something different, he is totally capable of doing that. And I don't know why Tucker or anybody else thinks that they can tell God how to deal with the world and his people.
is every bit as pressing, which is who are the people? Who are the modern? Yes, who are the descendants? So we know, and I believe, and I agree with you as a Christian, that God promised this land from modern day Iraq to modern day Egypt to this people, the Jews, to Abram's, actually not to Abram's descendants, as it says in Genesis 15. Who are his descendants now, and how do we know who they are?
I think they're the Jews, and we know who they are because they've always been a Jewish people. There has been an unbroken line of Jewish people, and they've lived in this land for 3,800 years. Sometimes not very many of them, because they were chased out all over the world. They were hunted down. They were almost annihilated during the Holocaust. They came back. To this day, Tucker, they represent, you know how many Jews there are in the whole world?
Please, no, I understand. First of all, the greatest genocide of Jews no one ever mentions was by the Romans, where they were literally banned from Jerusalem for 500 years.
Yeah, of course.
And it's all awful. And I'm opposed to all of that. I'm opposed to mass killing of anybody, period. I'm opposed to
hear you say that.
I mean it.
Yeah,
and I hope
I believe that.
on that.
I believe that.
My question is, and it's not a bumper sticker answer, it's a sincere answer, how do we know? Because what you're saying is that certain people have a title to a highly contested region. They own it in some deep sense. So I think it's fair to ask, who are they and how do we know? So the current prime minister's ancestors weren't from here within recorded history. He has no deed. Bibi Netanyahu, on one side, his family's from Poland. They're from Eastern Europe. So how do we know that he has a connection to the people who God promised the land to, Abram's descendants? How do we know that?
Well, if you take the genealogies that come not only from the Old but the New Testament, you see that there is a historical connection through the entirety of the Old and the New Testament that details the Jewish connection to this land.
Does that include Bibi's family? How do we know that if his family
they were
comes here,
scattered?
But how do we know it's the same people? No, why is that crazy? If you say to me,
if they speak the same language, if they worship the same God, if they follow the same Bible, if they follow the same cultures and traditions, and they always pray next year in Jerusalem, and they pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and they pray facing toward Jerusalem, does that not give you a little bit of a clue as to who they are?
Let's go through those things, because I would like to have a rational, this is a conversation.
Right. So as you might have heard and seen now, they've shifted from the boundaries of the land to focusing on the people, right? So one of the things that anti-Semites love to do is either go after the land or the people, right? So it was a saying I used to use a lot. It was a lot more effective before October 7th, but anti-Semitism on the left is I love Jews and hate Israel, and on the right, it's I love Israel and hate Jews. Now, that doesn't always work anymore because there's a lot of people that hate Israel and Jews, but there is this understanding out there of trying to separate the two. And one of the things I always say when I speak and talk about what I do, I encourage Christian support for Israel and the Jewish people. The reason I say that is because I'm trying to avoid people getting like squishing out on either side. Oh, I'm not against I'm not against the people. I just don't think they have a right to the land. Or Israel's amazing, but I just don't like the people. Right. So here Tucker is kind of dialing in on, an opportunity for people to not like both the land and the people is what he's doing here. Now, may someone love you and be obsessed with you as Tucker is obsessed with Bibi Netanyahu one day. Okay. Because he is convinced that there's no connection at all between Bibi Netanyahu and the ancient Israelites or anything like that. Now, I don't know. Maybe he's done this deep dive. Maybe he just, sits in his hunting lodge with his dogs on his lap, going through methodically the genealogy of Bibi Netanyahu before he changed his name, and because he went by something else, and his last name was something else in Poland. But the thing was, his father and his grandfather was a rabbi. He was a rabbi in the tradition of a particular kind of rabbi that traces their lineage back to Babylon. And where the people in Babylon Jews in Babylon trace their lineage to, you guessed it, King David. Okay, so there's a route by which that could happen. Now, I am not that obsessed with Bibi Netanyahu. I like Bibi just fine, but man, Tucker just is really into Bibi. He just like it's a crush almost, and he needs to cool off a little bit. But I'll just leave it there.
I've wanted. Bless you. Thank you for doing this. Let's just go through those things.
Okay.
So one of the things I admire most about Israel is they resurrected a dead language in 1948. Good for them.
Well, they really didn't resurrect it. It was existent.
Okay. That's a compliment. I'm not slighting.
No, but it is the first time in all of human history that a language has survived through this length of time. It's I would call it, you might not, but I would call it a miracle. One of many that you can attribute to this
I think it's wonderful as someone who loves language. Netanyahu's parents did not speak Hebrew. Okay. They didn't live in this region. Netanyahu, the founders of this country, were mostly secular. Some of them were avowed atheists. They were not praying for the peace of Jerusalem. They weren't praying at all because they didn't believe in God. There's no genealogy linking their families to the people of this land 3,000 years ago. They're not. So how do we know, since they didn't share a language, they didn't share a religion, they had no religion whatsoever, how do we know that they had a right to come here from East?
Well, that's not Bibi's family, because Bibi is actually in a line of rabbis. So that actually doesn't count. And I suspect that, if you read Torah, you read Hebrew. Now, Hebrew didn't speak it as a spoken language because that didn't happen for a while. Okay, but they certainly would have been able to read Hebrew in a liturgical form. There's lots of groups that do that, where there's a liturgical language that's not the same as a spoken language of the people around them. But here's the bigger point, is that you have this idea that the fact that secular people, atheists even, came about to found the modern state of Israel. And there are a lot of people, and a bunch of Christians do this as well, who say, well, the fact that Israel was founded as a secular nation means that God couldn't have been involved. Again, that is, we who are Christians believe in the providence of God. If we believe in the providence of God, it means that we believe that God works. It's a key feature of both Reformed and Catholic traditions in the providence. Like, God is active in the affairs of men. So we can't believe that it was a product of time and chance and international affairs, and it just kind of happened as things happen. Now, everything we have to believe that God is active somehow in everything. Okay. Now, the other thing that I like to bring up quite regularly is what kind of people came back to the land of Israel with Nehemiah and Ezra, because there was once upon a time, where all the Jews were driven from the land as well. It was the Babylonian captivity. And when the Jews came back with Nehemiah, I asked people, well, like, was it the super religious ones, the Torah observant, the Shabbat keeping, super religious people came back with Nehemiah? Or was it the the people who went west, in the gold rush and to cut timber in Washington or to fish Alaska? It was most likely it was those kind of people, the people that didn't have anything else, because the rich and the middle class, they don't want to leave things behind. Even now, a lot of people who are making Aliyah make it because it's just one of those, they don't have a lot of other options all the time. Now, if the return of those who came with Ezra and Nehemiah, they were not particularly religious. And again, how do we know that? Because in the book of Ezra, one of the big features, the whole chapter on this, is the fact that the priests had married foreign wives. Okay, so if the priests had married foreign wives, that means you're not dealing with a super religious group of people, because the priests should have known better to not marry foreign wives, and here they were marrying foreign wives. Okay, so the fact that that example exists of the return and restoration of Israel not being done by super religious people means that God can do it again. And what does God say? He brings the people back to the land. Why does he say he will restore the people back to the land? He says it's because of his own faithfulness, not because of theirs. So they could be terrible, terrible Jews, and God would still restore them because that is who God is, and that's what he does. And Tucker doesn't like that. And it's really evident in this section.
Eastern Europe, and
but they were
take
scattered.
the land.
They were scattered to
I
Eastern
understand
Europe.
that.
They were scattered all over the world. There were many in Ethiopia. They were in Russia. They were in Poland. They were throughout Asia. Jews were all over the place, but they were still Jews. But they were still Jews.
Okay,
That's
so then,
what
let
made
me
them
get to the
unique.
nub of the question, since again, a lot is at stake, a lot of money is at stake. Land is very valuable. Israel has a lot of resources. By the way, if you're accused of a crime, you can hide here. That's a pretty good passport to have. It's a good thing.
Again, if you're drinking, now you take a shot, because he just claimed that, again, that people who molest kids can hide out in Israel.
Right? So who's entitled to it? I don't understand, and you're very discouraged in the United States from asking this question for some reason. It's a totally rational
I'm not
question.
discouraged.
No, you're not discouraging.
Yeah.
Others do. You're like the only person I can have this conversation with. Everyone else will be like, shut up, Nazi. It's
I have asked Tucker Carlson on 3 occasions to have me on his show. Now, I don't know if I can do it now because he's quite toxic. But and every time he says no. Every time he says no. I'm happy to have this conversation at any point with Tucker and anybody else. I love to talk about this stuff. I'm not discouraged. Like, go ahead, ask the question. But you got to also deal with the answer, because there's good ones on my side, actually better ones than on your side. So come, ask the questions away. We can have it and hopefully have a real good conversation in the meantime.
a foundational question. Are you speaking of an ethnic group or a religious group?
Well, I think you're looking at, for many people, it is religious. There are people who may not have a deep religious connection to Judaism, but they're still Jews.
Okay, so it's an ethnic category.
It is ethnic, but it is also religious. It is rooted in religion. You can't take it out of it. Now, that means
then
there are
how
some people,
can an atheist?
Well, I will tell you this. There are some people who say, I'm Christian. They never go to church. They never pray. They never read their Bible. They don't tithe.
But they're not entitled to citizenship on the basis of that.
Well,
they're
but
not
I'm saying
entitled
they still call themselves Christian,
Of course.
even though they identify
Okay,
in
but
that way.
here's the difference. You're saying that people who have this identification have a deed to a huge chunk of land on the Mediterranean. Okay, so there's, it's a right. You keep telling me it's a right, and so it's totally fair to say, if you come to my house and say, I've got the title to your house, I get to ask, may I see it? Where'd you get it? And that's exactly what happened here. People from Europe, Eastern Europe, came here, in a lot of cases atheists, and kicked out a lot of people
they
who lived
bought
here.
land.
Well, but
They did not just throw people
They
out.
bought a lot of land. There's no
They
question
did
about
buy
that.
a lot of land.
But they
The
also,
whole
in
idea of Zionist
1948,
movement
kicked out a lot of people.
in
And
the war.
Oh, it was a war. I agree.
Yeah.
I'm not want to relitigate the history. I'm just saying.
Yeah, he doesn't want to relitigate the history because the history is inconvenient for his take here. Like, he is saying that there was only the Jews were kicking out people. In 1948, the equal number of Jews were kicked out of the Muslim lands, ethnically cleansed. There was like tens of thousands of Jews in just about every country in the Middle East, and it dropped to single digits, double digits, but maybe in the teens. I mean, even in like it is absurd to think that this is the most outrageous conflict in the world that created this, as the Palestinians call it, the Nakba, and it creates these forever refugees. In the 50s, there was a population exchange between India and Pakistan. When Pakistan was created from India, there was Hindus in what was Pakistan, and there were Muslims in India, and they exchanged populations to the tune of about 12 million people. Now, I'm sure you've heard about that because it's deeply ingrained and taught in every school book. It's taught deeply among the conspiracy bloggers. They don't talk about that. They don't want to talk about any other place on the planet where a major population exchange happened. Like Germany and Poland, Germany and Russia, all these places, like so many places around this same time, there were population exchanges. So 750,000 Palestinian Arabs left, and about that same number, 750,000 Jews, were brought into Israel because they were kicked out of the Muslim lands. Now, among them were Christians, for sure, but among them were the majority were Muslim, and that those inconvenient truths are not something Tucker wants to hear. The vast majority of the land that Israel was declaring a state over were purchased from rich Arab landlords. But Tucker doesn't want to talk about that either.
It's a fact.
Okay.
Including a lot of Christians wound up fleeing, and they lost their homes, and they've never been allowed back. And all of this was justified on the basis of this identity that is the ticket to the right that you keep referring to. So
it was also the identity that led people to the gas chambers. It was the identity that forced people to leave from Iraq and Egypt and Morocco and Libya and Algeria, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was that identity. It's like, are we going to, should we go full Gattaca here, where everybody walks up and you prick your finger and that determines what kind of job you have? That's the utopian vision that Tucker is offering here, which I would say is dystopian.
My question is very simple. I'm going to wait patiently for an answer. Does this right derive from religious affiliation or from genetics?
And I would say it's both. But I would also say that when you said that Christians were kicked out, Tucker, Christianity is growing in Israel.
Okay, but
and there is a big lie that goes out there. But no, let me finish this, because I keep hearing that Christians are really not treated well in Israel. That's a lie.
Well, there are lots
it is a lie.
There are lots of different.
There were 34,000 Christians in Israel in 1948. There are 184,000 Christians here today.
And by Israel, what are you counting?
You're talking about the land?
What territory are you counting? You're counting about Israel proper? Or are you counting
about Israel
the West
proper.
Bank as well and Gaza? I mean, what do you, when you say Israel, those numbers apply to what landmass?
It would be in Israel proper.
Okay.
There are 184,000. Now, I'll tell you where Christians are not doing very well. They're not doing very well in the Muslim-controlled countries. There's almost no Christians in Qatar, for example, except those who live in the Christian ghetto, who are the service workers.
I'm sorry. Look, I don't want to argue with you. There are many more Christians in Qatar than there are in Israel.
That's not true.
It actually is true. And I refer you to Wikipedia, Mr. Ambassador.
Wikipedia.
All right. There are, by sheer numbers, more Christians in Qatar than there are in Israel, right? In Qatar, there's something in the range of 360,000. And in Israel, there's about, as he says, actually about 184,000. So let's say twice as many. But here's the difference. How many Qatari how many Christians in Qatar are citizens of Qatar? And that number is 0. If it's not zero, it's a handful, because they converted somewhere else and are probably secret. But everyone else is, as Huckabee says, a guest worker. They're not indigenous. They're not there. They're service workers who happen to be Christians from the Philippines or some other country in the world. But they're not citizens. Whereas in Israel, they are citizens. Now that's a big difference. There are 184,000 Christians in Israel who have citizenship. That's a big difference. But Tucker's got to play the game. He's got to stand up for his benefactors.
I refer you to the government of Qatar, the government of Israel. These are knowable facts. I'm in
Jordan,
by the way,
numbers are down. In Syria, the numbers are down. In Lebanon, the numbers are down.
There
I'm just telling you that
about twice as many Christians.
But they live in the enclave. They are not native Qataris.
Okay, we're mixing so many different categories here. I'm just saying I get things wrong all the time. You've just gotten something wrong, and I think it's important to acknowledge it.
And Huckabee did not get that wrong. They are not indigenous Qataris who are Christians.
There are many more Christians in Qatar than there are in Israel. Fact.
How many?
Now you caught me. I don't know. I can look at my phone, but I was just there, and there are many more. Whatever. But I just want to get to the point that forms the basis of this whole conversation, which is who has a right to the land?
Yeah.
And you said it's a mixture of religion and ethnicity. Because, as I noted, and you agree, many of the founders, maybe the majority of the founders of modern Israel, did not believe in God at all. So they were not religious Jews. They weren't religious at all. They were atheists. They said they were atheists. I believe them. So that suggests it's ethnic. But it's also true, as you well know, because there's a famous court case about this, that ethnic Jews who convert to Christianity do not have the right of return. That was settled by the Israeli Supreme Court. I'm very confused. So that would suggest it's not ethnicity, because you invalidate your Jewishness by converting to Christianity?
There are a number of Messianic Jews who live in Israel.
Okay.
Who are here.
I'm aware of it. I'm aware of that
number.
But you're not contesting what I'm saying, because it's a very famous court case.
The right of return has to do with your mother, your grandmother. It has to do with family ties.
It's ethnic.
There's a lot of, ethnicity is a big part of the right of return.
Great.
To make aliyah, to come to Israel, to live here.
Then if both of your parents are Jewish and you have an ethnic right to the land, you are one of Abram's descendants, but you convert to Christianity. How is it you don't have the right to return? I'm totally confused.
But I know a number of people who have returned as Christians, but have Jewish history.
Are
and
you
Jewish
saying
ethnicity.
that Jews who convert to Christianity have a right, a legal right to return? Because I
know that they do. Whether, when you say, do they have a right to return? Do they prove?
it's a legal category, as in any government,
which is
Certain
by
people-
their family history, their grandmother, their mother, and there are many
I understand.
aspects of that.
I've read it. I think
but
at
I
this
know
point
that
it's
these
one
are
Jewish
people who are
grandparent.
Christian, and they came here, made Aliyah. They had Jewish blood, Jewish history. They were Christian, Messianic, but they came here, and they were welcomed here.
And they were given full legal rights. Here
Absolutely.
in a passport.
Yeah.
So clearly, it's not true that you invalidate your right of return by converting to Christianity. That's just false.
I'm not aware of that. I know that there are a number of Christians here. I go to church with Christians every week here.
Of course.
And
but do you have a right to come and say, I am an ethnic Jew, even though I practice Christianity, therefore I have every bit as much right to move into a settlement in the West Bank or into East Jerusalem or anywhere I want, Galilee, anywhere, because I'm returning to the land of my forefathers. I have a legal right in the state of Israel, even though I've converted to Christianity. You're saying that's true?
I'm saying I know people who've done it. Now, can I tell you what the law specifically is? I'm not sure.
Well,
because
it's really
I'm a Christian.
significant.
I don't have any Jew.
Man, Tucker is really well versed in this law. Man, he's like a famous court case. This is so important to him. This is like one of the this was his debate prep. One of the guys clearly on the opposing team, let's say, were brought this up and made this a big sticking point. But the fact is that Huckabee is right. There are lots of Jews, ethnic Jews, who make Aliyah, who believe Jesus is the Messiah. That happens. I know a bunch as well. And how it plays out with the court case, I don't know, but it does. So, put that in your pipe and smoke it. I just see it. I know a bunch. So something's going on. I don't know. Maybe there's a workaround, but Tucker's hung up on this big time.
Jewish roots, so therefore I cannot quote you the law. If you want me to do that, I'll look at it.
Well, it really matters because you're saying, in fact, people in the United States are being called anti-Semites, a lot of them, including me, because they somehow don't believe that Israel has a right to this land.
Do you think Israel has a right to this land?
No, you haven't defined what the land.
Oh. Did you hear that? That was the sound of Tucker saying, I wish I could play it back for you, but Tucker was basically asked by Huckabee, do you believe that Jews have a right to this land? And his immediate answer is no. That's what he says right there. He says no. Now he's going to follow that up with kind of like he's going to catch himself and backfill the words and say at the end with I don't know. But right there, it's clear that he doesn't think so. And that's clear. It's like not just this example, but it's pretty clear. It's like he's called an anti-Semite and says and simultaneously says the Jews don't have a right to live in this land, and is bothered by the fact that people call him an anti-Semite. He just as Yoram said in the part one where I read Yoram Hazoni's statement, Yoram tried to explain to him why people say that Tucker Carlson's an anti-Semite, and he didn't get it there either. So either he's like totally obtuse about this, or somehow lacks the self-awareness to see it, or has firmly embraced it and is just lying. I mean, I guess probably some other options, but those are the ones that come to mind.
Land is, and you haven't defined who Israel is, so I really don't know.
It is the land they're living in now, the borders that they have.
The borders are moving. The borders have moved in the last year.
What do you mean the borders have moved?
Well, they are the 1967 borders. I'm including, the
East
West
Jerusalem and
East
Judea and
Jerusalem.
Samaria.
What are the borders of Judea and Samaria?
Well, you basically take the Jordan River, and it's west of the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, to the Lebanon border. And Israel did have control of the Sinai. They gave that to Egypt. They had control of it.
Right.
They gave it away in 1979 in the peace agreement.
But okay,
So
whatever you call it, the land that was taken from Jordan in 1967, you call it Judea and Samaria. There's a significance to that I don't fully understand. I'm not against it. I don't
the biblical
know what it's the biblical.
80% of the Bible happened in Judea and Samaria.
But we've also established that the Bible gives Jews the right to occupy the land from the Nile to the Euphrates. So I'm very confused by why we've shrunk the land and why we're
Israel has shrunk the land.
God also has shrunk the land.
They have made that decision. Okay. That's why they gave away Gaza.
Now's
they gave away the Sinai.
now's the part
They've
for
given
the
away
real
a lot of
question.
things.
Abram's descendants are the ones who have the right to have this land, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Why don't we do genetic testing on everybody in the land and find out who Abram's descendants are? It's really simple. We've cracked the human genome. We can do that. Why don't we do that? Would you be against doing that?
I have no idea what that would prove. I mean,
Really?
maybe it would be.
What do you mean? It would prove who Abram's descendants are and who has a right to live here and who doesn't, according to the theology that you yourself just explained. And so I'm very confused as to why we don't do that. If you believe the theology that you've just explained to me.
Would we do that all over the world?
And everybody, this is the only country in the world that you've said has this covenant with God, that this people have a moral and legal right to the land.
What about people who convert to Judaism? Would they have a right?
Well, you've just said.
I mean,
that
there are
it's not
converts to Judaism, so
you just told
they
me
can make Aliyah. They may not have.
You've just
DNA.
told me that it doesn't matter. You told me moments ago, trying to keep track,
Okay.
that it doesn't matter whether or not you believe in God or whether or not you practice Torah Judaism or Rabbinic Judaism, which is something else that I don't even know if we should. I don't even know what that means. But it doesn't matter whether you're, quote, a religious Jew or not. What matters is that you are part of the Jewish people to whom God gave this land that extends from the Nile to the Euphrates. And so if you believe that, wouldn't you want to know with a burning passion who those people are? And because of science, we can now know who those people are. So why aren't we finding out?
I guess you could propose a DNA test for everybody who comes here, everybody who lives here. But
It's I love that Huckabee pushed back on him. It's like, we're going to do that with every place on the planet. I mean, literally, there's a whole movie about that. Like, it comes down to everybody's DNA, and everybody's DNA determines their job. Everybody's DNA determines where they live. Like, DNA is an interesting thing. So is the group identity. I mean, the fact that there was a criteria by which the Germans decided you were worthy of the gas chambers. There was a criteria that the Muslims in Iraq decided that you were worthy of being expelled from Iraq. Same with Egypt, Algeria, Libya, Morocco, etc. So you have that, like, there was a criteria, and there's a criteria that is, again, both genetic and religious. I mean, ethnic and religious. People decide, like, and I find it fascinating. One of the things that I've seen now, being in this space for more than a decade, how there's this irrational hatred of the Jewish people, and people can somehow sniff out whether a person is Jewish or not, regardless of whether or not they have they're wearing Jewish apparel, meaning like the piz or the black hat or the kippah. People somehow know. I was walking in the French airport last year, and there was 3 Jews in front of me. I know they were Jews because they got off the same plane as I did. And we were walking through an area that was outside the security area towards where the hotels were. And it's a long walk. It's like forever, it really is. And there's like homeless people and kind of like just kind of randos on the side. And this one homeless guy is totally ignoring everybody that walks in. Like, I can see 100 yards ahead of me. And I'm watching this guy's just kind of like, a crazy person, kind of standing and kind of looking at the sky and twitching and looking at his hands, like that kind of person, right? And all of a sudden, these Jews walk by, and this guy starts harassing them out of the blue. There was nothing about them, if you looked at their appearance, that you would go, oh, there's Jews. But somehow that's there. Okay? I can tell that story, similar stories to that, over and over and over again. But what Tucker is after is a scientific thing. He shifts from, well, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of Jew hatred out there. And if you are like, you know what, I'm going to be a part of that group. Okay. Like, it means you're joining up for the like the team that forever is harassed. All right. Whatever. I mean, go for it. But it also means that you get included in the place where the Jews can defend themselves and have a homeland. And mind you, that God is bringing people back to from the north to south, east, and the west. So there's something there. And Tucker is blind to it, spiritually blind to it, it seems.
I'm comfortable with secular nation states where none of this is done on the basis of blood. I'm uncomfortable with that. I'll just say that.
But there are people who may not have bloodlines, but who have converted to Judaism. Are they going to be able to live here? Are you going to kick them out?
By your standards, they can't live here. Because you just told me that they have a right to live here because God gave them the land because they're the descendants of Abram.
They're the descendants of Abraham. But if they're the spiritual descendants of Abraham and they've now decided that they're converting to Judaism, then do they have a right to live in Israel?
Well, there's a whole legal literature in Israel on that question. And my understanding is that certain types of modern Judaism qualify a person and other types don't. Is that your understanding? I don't believe that people converted, and I could have this wrong, but I know people who've faced this personally, people. I don't believe people who've converted in a Reform synagogue have the right of return. I don't think that is, because I know people who've married into Jewish families and they find out they don't have the right of return. So that is perplexing to me.
Yeah, I know, my experience is a little different than yours. I know people who have definite Jewish connections, family relations, but now they're Christian. Some are not necessarily practicing Jews. They're not, they're more secular Jews, as you've discussed, but they come back here.
Okay, I'm not against that. I'm just wondering, since you began this conversation by asking me, did I think they had a right to come here?
Yeah, that's
and
what
my question was, on what basis do they have the right?
Yeah.
And you said because God granted it to them.
And I also said because that there should be a land where Jews could live in peace and safety.
And I asked you what a Jew was, and you couldn't answer it. You said
I didn't
it partly is religious, but doesn't have to be. It's partly genetic, but it doesn't have to be. And so that you can see why I'm confused.
I think I was very clear that being Jewish is an identification either through blood or through faith that you're Jewish. It may be that you're a blood Jew, but you don't necessarily practice Judaism, just like there are people who say they're Christian, but they don't do a thing to demonstrate what Christian
There are a lot of bad Christians, including me some of the time, a lot of the time. But I don't have a right to real estate on the basis of my claim of Christianity.
You don't have a right to real estate if you're talking about a specific parcel. But if you're talking about a land, I think what we're talking about is...
That's all I'm saying.
And there was a designation to the family of nations of the world that there would be a Jewish homeland. Let's get to that point, because I think you've taken us on several trails here, and I'm not sure we can follow them all. But is there a reason that the Jewish people that represent, and I want to get back to this because you didn't let me finish a while ago, they represent 0.2% of the world's population. In the entirety of the world, there are about 16 million Jews total. And 8 million of them live here. The rest live mostly in New York or South Florida and a few other places.
Okay.
So,
who would never be asked this line of questioning? The Palestinian Christians that Tucker's hanging out with. You're not asking them, how long has your family been here? I mean, maybe they'll claim since the time of the shepherds. It's like, well, can you prove it? Show me the deeds. Show me the paperwork. That is anti-Semitism, because it's treating the Jews as particularly as different than anybody else in the negative way. Okay.
This is a small population of people. They have connection to this land historically, biblically.
Do they?
Yes, they do.
If Bibi's family, we know they lived in Eastern Europe. There's no evidence they ever lived here. He's not religious.
But
in what sense?
How do we know
that? Do you have his family tree? No, we don't.
Do you?
He doesn't. So no one does. That's the point.
But
so how do we know that he's any connection to this land at all?
And if there has been a practice of Judaism and a connection to the language, the Bible, the land.
His ancestors didn't. He doesn't practice Judaism in any rigorous way. His ancestors didn't live here. They didn't speak the language, and there's no evidence they ever lived here. So on what basis does he have a right to be here?
Very much speaks the language. He has fought for the land. His family has fought for the land.
Dodging a very obvious question, which is, where does this right come from? And the reason it's meaningful is because there are a lot of people in the territory that Israel controls today, particularly in the West Bank, who, through genetic testing, we can know their families have been here for thousands of years. We don't know whether they practiced Judaism, whether they were Samaritans, pre-Islam. We don't know that. A lot of them we know have been Christians for 2,000 years. They have less of a right to the land than someone whose ancestors, the only thing we know about them is they lived in Latvia or Poland. They're Eastern European. How does that work?
They're Jewish.
By what definition?
They're Jewish by their
But how do we know they have any connection to
Jewish?
There's lots of Arabs, Christians, and Muslims, of both Arabs, Christians, and Muslims, who came to the land. There's lots of, you can tell, one of the interesting things about the last name of Palestinians, Arabs in particular, is that they tend to be named after places, cities, towns, whatever. And there's a lot of the names and places and towns that are in other places in the Middle East. There's actually a letter that was presented by the Secretary of State under FDR to the President FDR that said that the number of Arabs who emigrated vastly exceeds the number of Jews who came. And so there was a lot of immigration at the time. And so, yes, maybe there are Christians that can claim and can point to their ancestry going way, way, way back. But it also is like, how did those, whose side did they join? Like my friend, Shadi Khalil, he joined the side of the Jews. And he is attacked for it repeatedly. Whereas a lot, guys over in Bethlehem in particular, who have taken the side of the Muslims. But it's a super small group either way. I mean, the majority of this fight is between Jews and Muslims, and the Christians are essentially Greece. And so you have this like a real obsession with genealogy of Jews, but not so much an interest in the genealogy of the Arab Christians. He's accepting what they say without question. And in particular in relation to the land, there was a land reform act in the late 1800s that the Ottoman Turks implemented, and it basically said if you don't use the land, you lose the land. It was like almost like you become like a settler kind of thing, and homesteading is as we had it in the U.S. and still do in some places, but it's a way like you get the land for cheap, but you got to use it, and that was the Land Reform Act. And if you don't use it, it becomes state land. So there's a lot of land that the Palestinians are claiming is theirs, but they didn't buy it, and they're just kind of generally saying it's ours, but they didn't buy it, and then they didn't use it, and so it returns to the state. So it's part of like it's what in the States we have this whole thing of eminent domain, and Israel does too, and lots of nations do. So, but all that doesn't really come into this at all because the obsession is really on the Jews.
By their faith, they're Jewish by the connection to the language, Jewish by the connection to the Torah.
But how do we know that specifically Bibi's ancestors ever lived here? How do we know that?
I'm not sure if I understand your question.
How do we know if the Prime Minister of Israel's ancestors ever lived?
Maybe I could ask you, how do we know they didn't? I mean, it's
on the basis of the claim that they did that all kinds of things happen. People are displaced. There's a money flow. I mean, it's a big question. A lot hangs on this. Mm-hmm. It's not some theoretical thing like, did my grandparents do this or do that? It's like, no, we have a right to be here because my ancestors were here. Okay, how do we know they were here?
I'm totally unable to process what you're trying to get at. It goes back, do Jewish people have any land on this planet that should be theirs to
I
give
feel
them?
That way about all peoples. I feel that way about Jewish peoples. I feel that way about...
Okay, then you don't mind them having this little
Is there any country, let me
right?
ask you this bluntly, is there any country that European peoples have a right to exclusively?
I think they have attained their land through conquest. I mean, let's ask ourselves.
Have the Britons attained their land through conquest? No, they've always been there.
The Romans, the Greeks, we've had all these civilizations.
Let's speak. Well, you could certainly say that here. The Romans controlled this, as you know, and they expelled all the Jews from Jerusalem. Amen. Yeah. I want them to control it.
Hope not.
I'm anti-Roman. Okay, we're on the same page.
Okay.
But my question is very simple. Is there any European peoples that possesses the same right to their land that the Jews, including people whose ancestors lived in Eastern Europe, possess here? The Britons, we know, the British people, the Scandinavian people, the Irish people, their ancestors have been there for thousands of years. That's provable through genetic testing. Do they have a right to their land exclusively?
Is anyone saying they don't?
Yes, of course. Yes. No one will say they will. And I'm asking you, do they have that right?
And I'm not sure what that question involves because no one is trying to force them out of their land, of their homes. But here,
wait, hold on. You have people, why won't you answer that question?
Because I just did.
Oh, so the Irish people have the same right to their land that the Jews
I don't know that
have
they have a biblical connection.
Okay,
but I'm a Bible believer.
Okay,
so that is.
But it's also a principle, and that is, and you've said it 15 times.
Sometimes people have land because they were able to attain it through war. They were able to obtain it when it was challenged.
I understand that. There's all kinds of consequences, but we can't say that about the Irish.
The world borders change all the time.
Not actually, the borders of the island of England have not changed, nor
but the governance of
Ireland. Those are just two examples. So you've got the indigenous people there. Do they have a moral right to that as their homeland?
And I think they would probably say, yes, we do, because we have ancient history to it.
What do you think?
I've never thought about whether
now that I'm raising the question, and you've spent a lot of time thinking about the right of the Jewish people to their homeland, do the Irish have the same right to a homeland?
As long as they can defend it, and as long as they,
as long as they can defend it.
But Tucker,
that is, again, that's the appeal that Matt Walsh lays out, is that the right, if you can keep it, if you can take it and keep it, it's yours, which is, to that brutality point. is kind of a direction. But I also agree with Huckabee here that there is something that it is the only land that I know that God has said to a people, this is your land. And because I believe in that God, and I believe that God is the true God, and that God gave his moral order to this earth, and we are supposed to follow it, that it is special. It's and I think that is a Christian position. I do.
The point.
Wait a
I'm
second,
telling you.
Wait, hold on.
No.
Now you just flip category. You're the minister here.
Yeah, and I'm telling
It's
you,
obvious they can defend it.
and
if they can't
you're
defend
not
it, they
allowing
lose
me
the
to
right.
tell you that I think that what is very, very special here is that there is a biblical as well as an ethnic and a historical. So you can take any one, but if you add them all together, biblical, historical, and ethnic, you have a very strong case that the Jewish people are living in a land that is indigenous to them, that has been their historic homeland for 3,800 years.
You can repeat it
and you can
as
also
often
look
as
in
you
the
want.
archaeology. The stones cry out.
Okay.
You've been to the city of David, for example.
I have. Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
So you know then that,
And I love
when
it.
It's an amazing
I
place.
agree.
It may be the greatest archaeological discovery in all of history because
great.
it's stunning. And they still continue to find things that date the Jewish people to this land archaeologically for 3,800 years.
We can date the British people to their land much longer, thousands of years longer. Stonehenge is 3,000 years older than any building built by the descendants of Abram in this country. And so it's fine.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to invalidate anyone's right. I'm just wanting you to affirm that right, but it makes you uncomfortable and you won't. And I don't know why.
Because I've never honestly sat down and asked myself, are the lines around the
It's an
United
island, so we know what the
Kingdom-
lines are.
I'm saying, but are those lines, are those rooted in something other than the historical connection? Well, great. Then they should have it. But
And
that's
they have
a
a right
question.
to have it. But then you said if they can defend it, and if they can't defend it, they lose the right.
But I didn't say it was exclusive one or the other. I think you're really going off the trail.
I just want to know if these principles apply universally or if they only apply to the people of Israel. And my answer appears to be just the people of Israel. They're the only ones with these rights. And I just reject that.
I
as a
didn't. I
Christian.
didn't say that. But I'm saying we are talking about Israel. We're in Israel. We're talking about Christian Zionism because you've made some disparaging statements about Christian Zionists. You've apologized for them, for which I appreciate. And now we're trying to define Christian and Zionist. And it seems like we've gone way, way off
I'm
of
trying
that.
to get, as you suggested as a former debater at the outset, I'm trying to get to terms and a common understanding of what the words mean.
And the term
And I'm
Christian,
no closer to that than I was when I began.
You're not closer to the term Christian, what that means?
I think it's someone who follows Jesus. And that's
Okay.
my next question.
All right, we'll stop that there. This has been exhausting, right? From this, we see that Tucker's focus here is he wants to fight over the boundaries and he wants to fight over the people, right? Because you take care of those, you get rid of those two things, then the Israel and the Jews doesn't matter anymore. And he is trying to use Genesis 15, the greater Israel, and the fact that Israel doesn't conquer greater Israel as evidence that it's not legitimate. And then the people, do they have DNA? What percentage of DNA is acceptable before God would be like, oh, you're one of the children of Abraham? I don't know. Do you? That would be a terrible thing to do. But it is it's like it could be done, but I wouldn't want to do that to anybody on this earth, actually. But it could be done. So thank you very much for watching this part 2, and hope that you like and subscribe. The next version of this, part 3, we get into Christians in Gaza, death of the innocent. We talk about Hiroshima. We talk about kids being killed, that kind of thing. And I've got an expert with me. So it's not just me. It will be me and Dr. Mark Levesque. So stay tuned for that. Be on the lookout. And thanks for following. See you later.